being available this week instead of our normal RAB week, which was last week. So again, thank you for that. Hear my echo. So, for those of you that I have not had a chance to introduce myself, my name is Quan Nguyen, and I work with the U.S. Army Environmental Command down in San Antonio, Texas, where it's nice and hot right now. So I'm a little bit relieved being here in Wisconsin this week to cool off a little bit in the 90s degree weather. But you can't win them all. So I am substituting here today for Mr. Matt Dayog, who most of you might have met or heard from since he's been providing this presentation in the last several RAB meetings, and also for Mr. Dwight Holland, who is our Environmental Support Manager for Badger. And I think he introduced himself at the last RAB meeting to you all. Unfortunately, both of them cannot be here tonight due to schedule conflict. But they may or may not be joining us online, so we will find out. Also, Miss Kathy Kropp, who is our Public Affairs Officer and usually participate on this meetings, she is not available either, so I will try my best to answer your questions, and if I cannot or provide any or need any more clarifications on your questions, I will have to defer back to them and get you that answer after this meeting. So with that being said, we are going to start doing a roll call for tonight's meeting. I am going to be, I have the list of the RAB members here, and then I'm going to start off, and if you can clearly and loudly state your presence so that we can document your attendance tonight, that'd be great. Michelle Hopp, I see her here. Alderman Ellington, is he online? I don't see him. Okay. Laura Ola? She's online. Great. Randy Poema? She's online. Great. Valerie McAuliffe? Sorry about that. Doug Jertson? Thank you. Roger Heinrich? Craig Welch? Here. Present. Okay, thank you. Dennis Hancock? Here. Thank you, Dennis. Dr. Thomas Sullivan? Okay, not present. Curtis Hedman? Here. Thank you, Curtis. Luke Lampo? Here. Thanks, Luke. Charlie Wilhelm? Okay, no Charlie. Chris Hansen? Here. Thank you, Chris. Mary Solom? No, Mary? Not yet, anyway, okay. We keep on monitoring the online participation. Mary Jane Cook? Yeah, I don't think she'll be here. Okay, she won't be here. William Starling? No, William. Robin Meyer? Robin's here. Grace Folsom? Thank you, Grace. Mike Gleason? Yep. Thanks, Mike. And I think that's all the members I have on this list. If I have not called your name, could you please introduce yourself so we can document your attendance?
May I just have the floor for a moment?
Sure.
I do want to introduce a gentleman at our table. This is our new TAP consultant, and his name is Jim Tidgen, and he will be joining us tonight to get up to speed.
Welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
I'm Wendy Carlson. I'm an alternate for C-SWAT.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Stephanie Brunsky. I'm an alternate for the town of Merrimack.
Thank you. Anybody else? I think, oh, I forgot to mention Mr. Justin Williams back there. Okay, sorry. Thank you for joining us. And I guess Joe Jensen's here too, the Spec Pro. All right, how about those online? Do we need to go through their?
Yeah, if you want to have them raise their hand, if they can hear you, they should be able to hear you. We have Dwight Holden,
Okay.
Megan Hazard. Hope I'm not butchering it.
Yes, was USGS, yes.
Laura Ola is here.
Great.
Randy Poelma, and Zhang Xiaoshan from Vietnam. That's the people I see.
So, okay. So no Matt Dayon.
No.
Okay. Leave me out in the code, I see. So I guess I control the slides, so. Close that. Okay, you all can see that. So tonight's agenda is pretty similar to the recent RABs meeting that we've had. We've gone over the opening remarks and the roll calls. The rest of the topics include the review of the April meeting, the County Road Z residential sampling well updates, updates on the proposed monitoring wells, a groundwater sampling summary for the spring 2023, the Grouper Grove Bay desktop sediment remedial investigation update, and also updates on our project management contracts and other projects that we're working on. And then we will show the dates for the upcoming RAP meetings. And then we will close out with any questions and any comments that you all may have. So for the meeting minutes from the last RAP meeting in April, we sent out that final meeting to you all on July 19th, incorporating some of the comments that we did receive, and we appreciate those comments. If anybody have any questions or suggestions on that meeting minutes, please ask, and if not, we can, I guess, motion to finalize that meeting minutes. Yes. Oh, thank you. We got a motion to approve the meeting minutes. Do we need a second? Thank you.
Yes. Laura has a comment.
Yes, go ahead, Laura.
You go ahead.
The question was if you want to discuss about the community involvement plan. I think we have a slide for that, but if you want to, I guess, address that now, I guess we can proceed with that.
Plume was introduced to Badger's RAB during the November 2015 meeting. And all that the RAB decided the plume would be put under monitored natural attenuation as the best cleanup method to reach remedial goals in groundwater. And I have absolutely no recollection that the RAB took a position on the
question here? The question was, when did that supposedly happen?
According to the final community involvement plan, it says November of 2015. But
Okay.
it doesn't say when the decision was, presumably shortly after, but I don't ever at any time recall the RAB taking that action or having any sort of consensus on the remedy for the groundwater.
Right. I guess, will we have the meeting minutes back that year? And if, I guess we can always take the task and look for that meeting minutes if there is one. And I just want to say is that the community involvement plan is a living document, and it could be revised or updated as a site condition changes. Go ahead, Laura.
On page 8 of the same document, it says, let me read it complete. The former Badger Army Ammunition Plant executed nearly all final actions through the DERP and REPRA corrective action. And it says, the remaining cleanup decisions will be executed under the Army's delegated CERCLA authorities and the substantive requirements of the Wisconsin state law. And I believe that consistent with CERCLA, substantive being important or meaningful, and it should say ARARs or reference to ARARs, which is applicable or relevant and appropriate requirements. That's my comment.
Okay, so just changing some of the languages, I guess, or statements in the SIP. And I think, like I mentioned before, when the next community involvement plan is prepared, either the next, usually it's every 5 years, or it could be sooner based on any other major changes to the program, we will note that and address that and look at that accordingly. Thanks, Laura. So the first topic on tonight's agenda is the updates on the County Road Z residential sampling wells. Back in January RAB meeting of this year, there was a question from RAB members requesting the WNR on why they have not asked the Army to do any additional groundwater sampling at the 2 residential well that you see in the small dot on this map. I'm not sure if you're able to see that or not, but there are two small dots on there that represent the residential well. The WDNR received the official request from Michelle Hoppin, I believe back in February of this year, to, I guess, for us to do additional research on the need to do those additional sampling. WDNR came to the Army and asked us to evaluate and take a look at any historical and recent groundwater data of those residential wells. And based on our research, the Army at this time determined that sampling for those groundwater wells is not warranted for now, based on several reasons. First is that DNT was not detected at residential well number 1 since 2007, and it was detected in 2006, a year before that, but even then the concentration level was below the WNR enforcement standard of 0.05 micrograms per liter. And the DNT at residential well number 2 has not been detected since 2006. And second, there was no evidence or detections of chlorinated solvents at either of those wells since 2006. Those two wells are located to the west of the plume and outside the plume. And furthermore, the plume is migrating towards the east, away from those residential wells. And lastly, I think we did also look at the well construction details of those residential wells. As you can see, that well number 1 was installed at a depth of 288 feet below ground surface, and well number 2 was installed at 275 feet below ground surface, which is at or below the bedrock. And since the chlorinated solvents have a specific gravity that is higher than groundwater, so that means that any evidence of them being there would have sinked down to the bedrock and would have been detected in those residential wells. So I guess we just want to answer your question, Michelle, and others on this topic, and let us know if you have any additional questions on that approach.
Well, I appreciate that. The reason we brought it
To do some residential well sampling on the wells located on the east side of the plume. We can add that to our program.
Yeah, so there's going to be 4 wells at the
Z, where the co-op area and the bike trail parking lot are. So those wells had been sampled in like 2019 and were clean, but because of this talk about the plume shifting, those wells are going to be added in August, and then they're going to be added to the annual sampling program. Those wells are also pretty deep, but because of where the plume is moving, that makes more sense to start sampling those more frequently. Those homeowners will be contacted after, obviously. They haven't been contacted recently, but.
So this exercise has been helpful because it's identified some more wells that might become, should be looked at.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up and answering that question. If I'm understanding correctly, Laura, you're asking if we are planning, the Army is planning to collect sample for PFAS at those 2 residential wells. Is that correct? So the Army is planning to proceed with the remedial investigation. No worries. We are planning to do the RI, remedial investigation of PFAS in FY24. And during that time, any wells that needs to be sampled or delineated at that area would be considered. I hope that answers your question.
I have to disagree with that because you have no idea, we have no idea where the plume has gone. It's highly mobile, it moved very quickly. I don't know how long it's been there. I don't know if it is moving in the same direction as the other contaminants are. It's probably the same general condition. I don't understand why you're not, if you have, or you don't know where it's going. That it should be tested, and DNR should be asking for that testing as well. This is why we even started an organization and why we have a RAB today, is because there's information that there was risk off-site and nobody ever tested the wells. And I understand the plunging mechanisms requiring additional studies, blah, blah, blah. But until we know where it is, I think we have to be aggressive in making sure that everybody has a safe well. It's elevated above EPA recommendations and recommendations from the Wisconsin Division of Health. So
Dwight,
that's my opinion on the matter. Thank you.
I think Dwight wants to respond.
Dwight, did you want to add to that?
Yes, ma'am. I'm glad to be here with y'all. I got here a little late. I had to drive through. I'm in Kentucky. Had to drive through numerous wrecks and rain and a few slow pedestrians. But I'm here to help with this. Um, for the PFAS, we're developing a comprehensive sampling program. We have a detection only at one location, and we're trying, we will do our attempt as part of our planning process to define that whole area if there's more out there. But the detections that we had was very, very low, and but there is a plan. We are pursuing this, and it's not like we're just letting it sit there and do nothing. We are addressing this. It just takes a little time, and when we get our plan developed, then there'll be a sampling program for PFAS.
We've waited patiently. We can't wait anymore. It's been several years. And you're incorrect. It showed up in multiple wells. The highest
There has been, ma'am, there has been multiple wells
Yeah.
in our PASI that we conducted, that was
Oh.
completed, and it showed only one location after we did all of our analysis, and we're going back to sample more and do a little more expansion. That is the plan.
All right. Well, if you can draw me a map showing me where the plume is, we can talk. But right now, you can't do that. You have no off-site data at all, so I strongly disagree.
We just got to give it time.
And no, we don't. We're talking about human lives here and an exposure that may have already reoccurring right now. And it's the job of this RAB to advise the military, and we're saying, we understand you want to do studies and you have to do additional study and you have to wait for funding till next year, but the immediate concern is that people may be exposed to unsafe levels of PFAS in their drinking water and not even be aware.
So the current DoD policy is still that 70 parts per trillion, based on the EPA health advisory risk level. If those concentration were ever to be above 70 parts per trillion, then the Army will be, I guess, providing a alternate water source for those residents. As of now, I believe those concentration are not at that level, and that's why we are proceeding with the remedial investigation phase to delineate the extent of PFAS concentration and address that accordingly.
It's down near 1 part per trillion. Basically, if you detect PFAS right now, it's above EPA's current recommendation. 70 is really old.
I don't think EPA has even finalized their promulgated drinking water level yet. And I think we're expecting them to have that done by the end of this calendar year, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I think it's a mistake to wait any longer. So I'm completed my comment. Thank you.
We would note that, Laura. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions regarding that?
To what that County Z residential well person, when I talked to him on the phone, he did tell me he was actually more concerned about PFAS than he was the DNTs. So it's on his radar now as well, just to report that back to you.
Thank you, Michelle. And it's as you know, is expected. I guess we are all addressing that around the country on the PFAS level, but we are working within the realm of our DoD guidance. So the next topic on the agenda is the updates on the proposed well installation. If you recall, in the previous RAB meetings, the Army is coordinating installation to install new monitoring wells at 3 different locations to better characterize the deterrent burning ground plume and the propelling burning ground plume. As we will show to you in the next couple of slides, we have made some progress with installing at one of those 3 locations. We've completed a well nest, which composed of 3 wells at the propelling burning ground near the Great Sauk State Trail on May 25th of this year. For the remaining 2 locations, the private landowner and the Alliant Energy locations, we are still working on their right of entry access agreement. And at the time of me preparing the slides, we did receive some news that the private landowner did approve of the right-of-way entry. So that's good news, and we will plan accordingly to mobilize to install the wells located on that person's land. As for the Alliant Energy location, the Army submitted to them a right-of-way entry agreement back on June 26th. They've had some issues with the agreements and provided some comments. And currently, we are working on, we as a Army, which includes the Corps of Engineers Real Estate Division, they're the one that handles the Army's real estate agreements. We will be submitting back to them a revised agreement within the next couple of weeks. And with all that being said, we're still on track or hopeful that the remaining well locations will be completed by this summer. I will pause there if there's any questions. And we will, Joel, who is with SpecPro, the Army contractor who did the well installation, he will be presenting you the locations of those wells and the summary of the wells that was successfully installed. And also he will be presenting to you the spring 2023 groundwater and LIGO data. So at this, if there's no other questions regarding this, I will turn this over to Mr. Joe Jensen.
Yep.
No question online?
No question.
All right, thanks. You know how to control this.
Good evening. So we got here is the plume maps showing the propellant burning ground plume down in the bottom left. So the A location here is the completed well nest that we have by the Sauk Trail. So I'm skipping to 2, but the depths of those 120, 180, and 252 indicate different vertical sections that we were trying to mimic from other monitoring wells that are north and south of there, so we could get a cross-section of where the plume could be. The 252 is a well that's drilled to the top of the bedrock. That's much deeper than we had anticipated, but we wanted to mimic what we have for any wells, that anything that could possibly sink towards the bedrock, and then we'd be able to find that particular zone. I got some pictures, and we'll show you stuff about the installation. As far as the B well here down by the river, that is down there where, if anyone knows where the bike trails are down there below the dam, that's the location that we're trying to gain access to. There's an overhead power line. And so just a lot of things to negotiate with getting those wells installed. And those wells will be trying to be right in the middle of the potential where the propellant burning ground plume before it goes into the river. And then the A nest here on the upper right, that's the deterrent burning ground, and we're trying to evaluate what if the burning ground plume has actually migrated further to the southeast than originally anticipated. So those are two depths which mimic what we're seeing on a well that's up gradient, and I do have a slide that talks about that plume specifically later. So during the drilling, we were able to get some airplane photos while the rig was out there, so we could kind of see just an overview of probably some other things around the site too. But so right along the trail, if you can see my mouse, yeah, just moving, here's the bike trail. Up to the north would be the Badger Army plant, and you're looking kind of north, so it's running east-west up there. And then there's a property boundary that runs where the two fields are here, and we were able to gain access on DOT right-of-way property that the bike trail manages. So we were able to use the bike trail for access up and down with our equipment, working with Sauk-Prairie or Sauk County Parks Department. And then the bottom photo is looking back towards Lake Wisconsin, straight to the east. And then the road here you see, this is the south boundary road of Badger. And so you're kind of looking at a cross section through the propellant burning ground plume as it would travel up from the north here on the left side of this picture down, and then it's coming down. And at the very bottom of that photo, if you can see, that would be the co-op, where the end of the bike trail is at the intersection of 78 and Z. So we do have monitoring wells along County Road Z, but we had not had any monitoring wells in this middle section. So showing some pictures of what they were looking like. So the upper left picture is just what the wells are if you were standing on the bike trail. If anyone's biked by, they're gray now, but they're gonna get some better paint and some labels. They're probably like 15 to 20 feet off of the bike trail, so not really in anyone's way, but the adjacent farmer has just a little bit less land to farm, but it's just they're leasing land from the DOT. So DOT still owns all this property there. And then we've got some pictures. They used a Rotasonic rig, and it was an ATV, so less impact to the ground. But Rotasonic will vibrate the casing, and we used this method before. So it vibrates the casing and rotates as you go down. And then all of the 20-foot sections release. So as you see, let's see if I don't have a picture. So the trailer that is to the right here contains the sections, and they're moving them in and out to go up and down. It's a little more complicated than like a residential well driller would have done. This is a much more expensive process where they're also making sure they're not recontaminating up and down with the hole. Residential wells are not interested in keeping track of all of those things. But we have to be real careful here as we're going down through the plume, getting to the bottom. You're actually able to take samples through the core of the barrel, so we can evaluate all the geology as you're going down. Down to the right, we're showing they're installing some of the PVC pipe raising up sections and then screwing them in as you go down to build the well all the way to the bottom. So same techniques, these wells are installed the same as we've been doing it here for decades. Same approach. There's sand, very good water. The water in these wells is super clear and very conductive, so it comes in very fast, kind of like the pumping wells that are around. They get really high volume of water from all the irrigation wells. So just the bottom picture showing that we're developing the wells before we're even thinking about doing the sampling. So we did sample these wells. One thing, we got these wells sampled in the beginning of July, and we did get some preliminary data back that I've shared with the DNR and just verbally. So there is some carbon tetrachloride in the wells, which is below the enforcement standard. There's just a little bit of chloroform, and the D well has a little bit of ethyl ether, but it's below 1 part per billion, which the standard for the DNR is 1,000 for drinking. So it's not really as high contaminated as other sections of the plume have been, but this is just one spot within the middle. It's not like every spot. You can't drill a well everywhere out there, but at least it'll give us a good indication if there's a trend moving through this particular zone down towards Highway 78. And there was no D&T in any 3 wells so far. But we're going to be testing this well nest the same as all the regular PBG, September and April, so twice a year. So we're going to be able to, just like the other wells to the north and south. So now here's some update of what we did in April. So I'll just show you down here, we have a box for ethyl ether. So I just mentioned we had very low ethyl ether in the well, which is a star here on this map. That's the well nest that we just installed. So we did have ethyl ether down here on County Z, which would be to the west of the well 2 that we were showing before, the well 1 and 2 residential wells. So we did have ethyl ether exceed the enforcement standard of 1,000 at that well, so that was at 1,200. Last year we had it at 9.7, and this D well is the same thing where it's right on top of the bedrock. So it's the same kind of construction. You drill to the bedrock and then you install the casing. So that was a little not really expecting that high of a number, but definitely going to be monitoring, and then hence the idea that we're going to also be monitoring these additional residential wells towards the east. If the plume is moving east, we want to keep trying to figure out if there is something potentially moving. We also have additional monitoring wells in the windings, for anybody who's already familiar with that area, that we do have those wells available that are to the bedrock that we can then add to the program if needed, if there is some issue over there. As far as this call-out box, we're more about the D&T at the source area. So in the past, we've discussed these increasing concentrations, and is that what's going on? So during April, we sort of summarized in some of this box over here, the tables. So we did have an increase of water over the years, and now we've had a decrease. So we've had 7 years of decreasing water, and some of those D&T concentrations had been dropping. But there have been several wells within the area of the source that had increasing and then some decreasing. So I'll just highlight a few of that. So we have PBM 006 here, the first well, and that's located here in red. That's just south of where the area is capped, where the PBG waste pits were. That's the mound where everyone would talk about it's fenced in, where all the waste was burnt back in time. So we did have an increase from 1 part per billion. So enforcement standard for DNT is 0.05. 1 has been the standard for many years in that well. And in April, it did jump to 10. And this is the total. So it's all 6 isomers together. We do find all 6 isomers in many of these wells near the PBG cap. 8202C, the next one, that's showing here in red, that's in a nest. That's on the other side of the cap, right on the edge of the cap. That well is paired with the A well, which is one that, if anyone remembers, has had very high DNT concentrations in the past from these water levels increasing. So the C well is indicated as it had been near 1, 0.8 in April, or before April, and now it was just over 10 for total DNT. So these are right, these 2 wells we're talking about are right next to the cap where the waste pits were. And then the next nest is this 1401, which is straight south down gradient. If anyone, it's just on the other side of where we had a decontamination oven. The concentrations in these 3 wells, the A, B, and C, so different horizons, these have increased. We're showing between 0.3 to 9, 0.3 to 0.5, and then just below the enforcement standard in the C to 0.5, which is 10 times the enforcement standard. The C well is a deeper well, and we didn't have a D well in this nest, but we do have a D well really close by that we're going to start to sample to evaluate the vertical component and to see if there is something going on vertically down gradient of the PBG cap. And then decreases that we were noticing, this 001, which is within the cap itself, it's underneath. We did have in 2022 up to 280, and that had dropped down to about the 10. And then the 9801 had dropped down a little bit between 22 and 23, and that's near the cap. And then the A and the B, which are right by the C, those concentrations have dropped. So DNT can still move vertically within the plume. It isn't just like gasoline that it's going to stay right at the surface. Chlorinated solvents will sink, as we just mentioned. DNT can also be at lower levels within the aquifer. So it's something we need to continue monitoring. And obviously, any future remediation would be tied to any verticality of these well depths. So something that we need to keep considering for any future remediation. Any particular stuff on the propellant burning ground questions before I move on to the next plume?
Do you have any high increased water that maybe took some stuff down and then moved it south?
That's a very possible. The question was, is there any of these increases related to this water table that had increased in the past? And I do believe that there's potential for some of that have now been released in that area. Because the cap is contained, the water table does not necessarily move freely. All of the water around the cap is migrating away from it. It's routing it away from it. So the water table is depressed underneath this cap. And so it does do some different things with the groundwater. It can't just freely move under it. There's a little bit of a depression. So there could be a delay with that particular area from those wells. But it still could be easily related to that water table up. Any follow-up question? Anybody else have any questions?
Concern about this higher level now is no longer, it's not underneath the cap, it's moving down the plume. How can we are we going to track it, or?
The concern, if this is outside of the cap question, and what can you do, I'd say it would be related to any of the remedial design and how you're going to perform if in situ is the plan. Then you need to really be watching when you're actually going out to do this. You really need to understand your 3D picture of what you're trying to remediate. So it does create more, if there is migration, you need to understand that before you go out and start remediating. No other online questions at this time? Okay. Is that good for now, Michelle? I can't think of any other questions. Okay. Oh, okay.
I'm just trying to understand. It sounds to me like what you're saying is that remediation, I'm so used to us not remediating, you know? We just.
That's what I gotta think about. Is
Yeah, and so I was just thinking, so what are we gonna test, what wells? But now we're gonna move into the remediation, so.
But you still need to know where
There
to
is.
remediate, and so it creates more challenges. It's not just at one zone. You would have to remove all zones that you're looking at with these wells. You can't just say it's the shallow ones because you can't let the deeper ones continue to migrate. So an update on the deterrent burning ground plume, and DNT is the main contaminant of concern here. It's the only contaminant that we're finding above the enforcement standard for drinking. So the star here is where we do have the 2 proposed wells that we're trying to evaluate if the plume is migrating towards Highway 78. So Highway 78 is running on the east side. And just so you reference, this is, I think, Spear Drive up to the north. And then the red is the plant boundary cutting through the middle. So the on-site concentrations are still above the enforcement standard. We're not saying it's like clean, but they're still at least decreasing. Not decreasing enough that you wouldn't want to remediate, but it's still positive. The off-site concentrations have still shown some increases, and I wanted to highlight this red dot here. So the DNT at this well, which is the shallow, 1503, we have had some ups and downs with DNT concentrations being detected. So in April, it was above the enforcement standard. It was just above 0.1 for total DNT. So we did decide to change the plume boundaries to at least include that well, and then down in the bottom portion where before the star, the plume was increased just to take into account that it's probably moved, and like I said, this plume has moved from off-site, so not sure if it's actually continuing to move. So when we get this well nest installed, we will know for sure, is this plume even there? We hope that it isn't at that well nest, but if it is, then we will change the plan. And obviously the plume drawing, and then we talked with Luke, and there would have to be obviously additional monitoring wells that would need to be installed if this plume is something that has gone that far. So this well nest here is something that we're doing quarterly, and so we're also evaluating everything down in this zone quarterly. So there's also a residential well here on Highway 78 that we have been testing annually that we now are doing quarterly. They do not have any DNT as of last month, so we're trying to be proactive on making sure we're at least getting them tested constantly and they've been on the sampling program for decades in the past.
You have to know what the depth of their well is.
Their depth of their well is very similar to the B level nest that's in here that has DNT above the enforcement standard. So it's in the sand. And then the residential well down here, that's the one that the Army had replaced several years ago, which was in the sand that had D&T above the enforcement standard already.
And where is that, Joel? The one that was replaced?
The replaced well,
Yeah,
that's right in here.
okay.
So that would be on that would be west of Walsh's Bay property. And so we do still test 3 wells on the opposite side, and 2 of these wells are in Walsh's Bay community. Everyone on that side has a Sandpoint well. So very shallow sand wells to the east of 78. Any other additional questions about the deterrent burning ground plume? Anyone online?
Laura has a question.
Okay.
Are you gonna be discussing that?
Oh, you might have to start your question.
Are you going to be discussing the central plume?
So we just, sorry. We just, so the question was, are you gonna be discussing the central plume? We just sampled the central plume in June, so we don't have the published results yet to give a presentation on that. So that would definitely be at the next RAB meeting.
My question is specific to the, let me back up here a little bit. In 2022, Badger submitted a document titled that were planned for air burning ground, solid burning ground, but the department also noted that the plan that the Army submitted did not include recommendations for the installation of additional monitoring wells to define the degree and extent of the central plume. And they note the plume analysis could not be completed for the central plume due to insufficient number of detections, of well detections, and also the USGS report used residential wells as a primary means for plume delineation at the downgraded portion of the central plume. But it's important to note that residential wells, this is also in the DNR response, residential wells are not compliant with acceptable design standards for groundwater monitoring wells as required by Wisconsin Administrative Code. So, why has the facility now responded to this request from the department for additional wells and delineation of the central plume as well? I know there was some stuff that the Army's been trying to do is distinguish between on-site and off-site groundwater, which is bogus. I don't know if that was part of the consideration, but why didn't you complete the requested installation?
The short answer to your question, Laura, is that the Army is planning, or still in favorable to install those wells in the central plume. We were hoping to, well, just back up that, we initially submit the work plan to do this 3 location wells initially back in September, and WDNR provided their approval of that work plan, in addition to requesting to look at installing more monitoring wells in the central plume. At that time, we were in favor of doing that, and we were planning to get this 3 locations completed first. The right-of-way access entry agreement took longer than we have hoped. So just to answer your question, we are planning to do that, and look for the I guess financial resources to to complete those wells in the central plume.
Nice to hear that that's gonna be happening. I appreciate that.
No, thank you for reminding us in the group and asking that question.
So then, Joel, I have a question. Turn burning ground. So you had mentioned that Highway 78 has a residential well that's now gonna be tested 4 times a year. So based on what Laura is saying, and you may have answered this already and I didn't catch it, is there a monitoring well that's being planned to be put there instead of using the residential well?
So the monitoring well, do I need to repeat the question? Okay, so the monitoring well that's straight south, this is it's straight south of that home. That's the wellness that we're trying to utilize, to not use just that well to say, hey, the plume has reached that far. But we're hoping to get it in there soon.
All right, thank you.
Sure. That's up for groundwater.
Thanks, Joe, for the updates. So the next topic is providing you all on the updates for the Google Grove desktop remedial investigation report. So the Army received a draft copy of that report back in April of this year, and we reviewed it and provided our comments to the contractor that prepared the report in May. During that time, the Army and our contractors also met with WDNR on May 25th to provide them on the status of where that report is at, and also to provide them the opportunity to have any initial comments on the I guess recommendations, so that when we submit it to them, that it won't be too much of a surprise. So just pretty much to have everybody on the same page during that meeting. And the draft report was submitted to DNR just on just last week, actually, July 17th. They received it, and they are in the process of reviewing it, and will provide us with any comments that they have. And then we were hopeful once that is done, we will provide you with the findings and the data and the recommendations within that report at a future RAB meeting. We're hoping for October, but maybe not a full picture of that, depending on the review process of DNR. But regardless, I think we still would have some kind of presentation on any initial, information regarding that report. Anyone have any questions regarding that report? So for the project management updates, for the proposed plan, for the site-wide groundwater remediation, as discussed in previous RAB meetings, the Army plans to install injection wells and inject emulsified vegetable oil, EVO, to reduce the groundwater concentration of DNT and volatile organic compounds, VOCs, at the plumes, groundwater plumes. So we submitted the proposed plan to DNR back in February, I believe, of this year, and they provided us with their comments in June. We met with DNR on recently, July 7th, to discuss their comments, and based on our discussions and their comments, the Army is currently revising that proposed plan. Very minor changes to that based on their comments, and we will be resubmitting back that revised proposed plan to them very shortly here. And once that is completed and approved by DNR, the Army will begin with our posting of a notice for the public meeting to share that proposed plan with you guys and to the greater public within this community, and explaining all the alternatives that was evaluated and the remedy that was selected. And as mentioned before, we will be providing you all, the public, with 60 days to review and provide any comments on that proposed plan.
And I guess I have a question because we'll be needing to meet as a TAP. And so how, are you gonna give us heads up? When do the 60 days start?
The 60 days probably will start once we post that notification in news outlet. But I think we can hold off on that until you have a chance to utilize your TAP resources and review that internally, and have your TAP contractor assist you with any questions that you may have, and then proceed from there with the public meeting.
So you'll be reaching out to us, telling us we're ready, you're ready?
Ready for
For
the.
us to meet as a TAP?
I think I presume you have the Mr. Jim Chincham, who is here today with us, contact information, and that you guys will be coordinating internally on when's best for you all to meet with him. So not sure, I don't think we will be involved with that scheduling.
That part, but when do we get, what I'm concerned about is we'll learn about it so late, it'll be hard to get everybody together.
We
So-
need to know when that is gonna be available to us, so
Right.
we can
Right.
schedule it.
Got you,
If
right,
it's
I
not
understand.
until you have
Thank
the
you.
public
Yeah.
meeting,
Right.
you're really cutting our time short.
Well,
Right.
like I said before, we definitely would not,
Initiate that public meeting right after right after the proposed plan is finalized. But to answer your question, that proposed plan, we're hoping to have that on an Army perspective completed by the end of this month or early August, and then hopefully DNR should have. I'm just speaking on their behalf, since this is just a minor revision to the proposed plan, a quick turnaround on that approval, and then I guess you will have that report available around mid-August or late August timeframe.
Just so I know, I don't have to go and read a newspaper to
Oh.
find out about, that's what I'm trying to get at.
Right.
How will I know? So I'm just hoping that I'll learn from you guys.
and we will
Make
make
a note of that once that proposed plan is available to release to the public, that we sent you an email or something and let you know that.
Sure.
Thank you.
I know it's gonna take a lot of effort to
It'll take
coordinate
a little bit of work.
whoever wanted to, meet with,
The TAP person. Yes.
I think one of the reasons that these questions are coming up is because of the procedural issue that I raised at the last meeting. And that is that you're moving forward now with implementing a strategy as part of a decision that you have not formally yet made. So it kind of blows me away as a former federal resource manager, how you can spend federal funds to implement a decision you haven't made yet. But that's more of a procedural issue, but the cart is a little bit ahead of the horse here.
right,
That's one concern I have. Second concern I have is if this is a restoration advisory board, at key points in the groundwater restoration, we've always been advised about what's going on. Back when you had the and the MERM, and then we went to monitor natural attenuation, and now we're going to another step of trying to, hopefully once and for all, deal with the groundwater contamination. But we're at a critical step here And we're talking about things that we don't know much about. We see in the comments from the WDNR that they have concerns, some of which I share, that we had to get through an open records request and were not shared with this board. So I guess I'm requesting that at the next meeting that the DNR and the Army get together and give this board a briefing about some of the issues that you've been discussing with them, how they've been resolved, and how you intend to move forward in terms of the effectiveness of the strategy that you're moving forward with.
Thank you. Yeah, noted that we can certainly have that as a topic on the agenda. Yeah, as you all know, the proposed plan took a while, to get it completed, and we do not want to stop any momentum in terms of cleaning up the groundwater. In regards to the procedural part of this whole process, that we have not implemented this remedy yet. That's why part of this part of the procedure is providing public input in that public meeting. And once that comment's received, we still have to go and provide that comments and provide that briefing to our Army folks on that decision, and for them to approve that implementation, that remedy. So while we hope that this recommendation for that alternative should be technologically sufficient and effective based on other sites that we've worked with and use, there's still other opportunities for the public to be involved with that. And I guess just to kind of remind that, the public meeting forum, we're hoping that you get provide us your input on any kind of insights based on your personal community, knowledge, more so than the technical part, because obviously you could ask to understand better the technical part based on with your TAP meetings and whatnot, other resources you have, but the purpose of that public meeting is to gather community concerns or favorability on that issue, more so than just the technical part. Yes, Rob.
Tag along with what his comments were. I guess I don't see why this board, which is supposed to be an advisory board, is not given an advance copy of that document to comment on during the development process, but instead are just considered part of the general public. And you guys take months to get through this stuff and make changes and modify it. We get your finished document, and oh, by the way, you get 60 days from the time we decide to give it to the whole world. I think we should have been given a copy of this by now just to see what's going on, because it's hard for us to advise on something we don't get to look at.
I appreciate that comment.
I mean, the DNR raised a number of good issues, I thought, in their comment letter. And I'm not saying that everybody here has the technical knowledge to comment on that. But the other aspect of this board is to be a conduit to the community and the public. And we can't effectively do that, answer people's questions, if we don't know what's going on. And so we're asking you to brief us, bring us into the process.
And our next RAB meeting is potentially after the 60-day public comment period. So you're gonna come and bring two sides discussing it to us after our comment period is closed. So it seems like, again, the cart before the horse.
Yeah, I definitely apologize if that proposed plan and that type of information sharing was not provided to you all before my time. But we would certainly add that to our next agenda, and
The next agenda is after the public
The public comment won't be submitted until.
we submit it. Yeah, so we control that posting.
So when you give it to us, we can have it before you are releasing it to the public?
Exactly. That's why
Yeah,
that's
that was
mentioned.
kind of what I was getting
Yeah,
at
so
too.
Michelle,
Yeah, it just, yeah.
So the next topic is the second 5-year review. The report, as you recall, is being conducted by a third-party independent contractor, Dawson, and they have to submit that report to the U.S. Corps of Engineers, the Center of Excellence, who have the specific technical specialties on reviewing this kind of reports. They have provided their comments to the contractor as of early this week, actually. And once they incorporate and address those comments, they will be providing that draft report to us, USAC, and our legal folks to review. And we're still hoping that have a final copy of that report completed by October 31st and signed. And then at that time, we will be sharing that report available with the public. Any questions online or here regarding that? And the community involvement plan, so just an update on that. The final version of that plan was completed and submitted to the Army on May 18th, and we reviewed it and provided our comments, and the report was finalized, and it has since been posted to the Army website that is shown on the slides on June 12th. So a copy of that is available for all, if you all want to take a look at that. And as I mentioned earlier to Laura, that this plan is a living document, and it can be updated and revised based on any changes to the cleanup program.
Before you leave that slide, we could circle back to the first bullet for just a moment. And I guess this comment is a recommendation more so to our consultant than anything at this point. My request would be that we would have a very thorough discussion, not only of this strategy, but also of some of the potential alternatives that might be out there, even though they may not be part of the proposed plan. I would like to have some tutorial, if you will. And I would challenge them to also think about this in a pretty detailed way, almost like a class, that providing some reading material in advance and teaching it at a level that can be understood at a variety of levels, including, kind of at a high school, graduate, even all the way up to graduate school level course. Because I think we have some very astute individuals in this advisory board, and I think having that kind of input would be very informative. I don't think that you would accomplish very much in one hour meeting sometime. I think this is going to be pretty complicated. That's just my recommendation or comment.
Yeah, which I think he's talking to you're primarily addressing Jim, right?
Yeah, I don't know that that's what we hired him to do.
Exactly. And I have been giving him all the documents, so he's getting up to speed. And he teaches all these really cool classes at UW-Madison in the engineering department, so he'll be a good teacher.
Yeah. I'm sure he's well prepared to provide that.
And,
To follow up on that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
There's a question online. Laura, go ahead.
maybe if she can text her question also.
Laura, you have a question?
Yes, I don't know where we are on the agenda, but I wanted to comment on remedy selection. And as I mentioned before, with the, without the PFAS data, it's difficult to know if the remedy selected for the DNTs and the solvents is going to be appropriate and applicable. And in particular, I wanted to restate my concern about the lack of PFAS data for the northeast corner at the deterrent burning ground. If you look at the description of the site, this is the 2021 RIFS, and they're talking about the deterrent burning ground. And landfills are a well-established and known source of PFAS contamination. At the northeast corner, coal ash from the power plant was buried there, construction rubble, trash, burned garbage. I'm reading from the Army report. Structural timbers, asphalt, cardboard, paper. They were burned in pits in landfill number 3 and landfill number 5, which is northeast of the deterrent burning ground. Also received office waste, demolition debris, coal ash, demolition debris. So I think we need to expand the PFAS testing, and we need that data sooner rather than later, because the remedy is site-wide groundwater contamination, and PFAS needs to be part of that plan and remedy selection. Thank you.
Laura, for that question. So regarding, I guess the question was that additional PFAS sampling is needed at the deterrent burning ground plume area. As mentioned before, the PASI that was completed, did not identify that area as having any historical releases. But having said that, when we proceed with our RI phase of the work, during that time, we will have a technical working group as part of that, that phase, and work accordingly with the DNR. And if there's a need or a consideration for other locations that need to be looked at, besides the one location that was identified in the PASI report, then the technical working group will consider that any locations that might need to be, I guess, evaluated and sample.
I'm with the Bluffview Sanitary District, and we've tested our drinking water, and we're fine. We have no issues. But at the same time, because we take the leachate from the landfills, do we know if there's PFAS coming from the landfills? Are you testing for PFAS out of the landfill leachate?
I'm going to defer that. Joel, do you know if we're collecting any PFAS samples?
So landfill does not test for PFAS. That is not a DNR requirement.
Yeah, DNR just started it. We've only had to test once for DNR on the drinking water at this point in time. But it might be something that's helpful to us, because if that's being discharged through our treatment plant, that's going into your groundwater. So I would like to request that the Army add PFAS testing, even though the DNR doesn't require it, to maybe do an occasional PFAS test.
Okay, so I acknowledge that question, that we will receive that requirement from DNR. So I guess we will wait on that. We cannot.
We can take the test. But I'll tell you now that if we test it and there's PFAS, we'll reject the waste. So I would recommend you look at it.
Thank you.
So Luke, that would be solid waste. Probably know who the project manager is. Okay.
Some updates on some contractual contracts that we've been working on. for the settling pond expanded site inspection and the development of the site-wide groundwater monitoring plan. The Army is still working with the our contracting agency, the Mission and Installation Contracting Command, also known as MIC. And you know, the procurement process has taken slower than we have liked, mainly due to you know, staff shortages at the MIG. So, and in addition, we are procuring this award as a sole source. So are several milestones that needs to be completed during that procurement process, which includes, you know, providing them with a letter of justification on using the sole source, market research, legal review, and so on and so on. So the process to begin with is already pretty much involved and lengthy, but to add on to the, you know, some of the, you know, staff shortages at the MIG, you know, it's something that we cannot control. Having said that, the MIG did complete their market research, which is part of the milestone that is needed to move to the next phase of contracting. They completed that in June, and they are still providing us with a target award date of late August. But I would not, you know, I'm just going to say that as a transparency. But if it comes back you know, as something moved to the left or the right, then I wouldn't be surprised, because they have provided us with earlier award dates as a target, but they keep on moving to you know, to the right, and it is where we're at, and we're still hoping to award this contract by the end of this fiscal year.
I have a question, if I may.
Sure.
And I talked to Luke at the gas station ahead of time, so he knows this is coming. But when I saw this on the slides that you sent out earlier, it made me think about the resolution that this RAB body had put forward to the Department of Natural Resources, where we were asking the, you know, WDNR to order expanded soil and sediment testing for all 6 forms of DNT. And when I saw that we were making progress in getting this awarded, I'm thinking, well, are we being ignored with our resolution? And, you know, which I know happens often, unfortunately. But then I talked to Luke about it, and behind the scenes, it sounds like Representative Pocan had gotten involved and written a letter, and then the DNR was also talking back and forth, and it sounds like the bigwigs had come up with a solution or an answer to us, but the problem is that we didn't see it, we didn't hear it, and that's why you know, I think it's on your webpage, which is awesome, but we didn't know about it. So it's not your fault, Luke. It's just one of those things. You know, you thought we were being communicated to, and we weren't. So it concerns me. First of all, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the solution is, although it sounds like we're being turned down, would be my guess.
Turned down in regards to
having the
those
Army do the 6 DNT in the soil testing, especially if you're moving so quickly with this contract. And so I guess it's discouraging. I know this is a lack of communication, but I would have liked, and I'm not mad at you, you know, but I just would have liked to have known, especially since we're moving forward, because we don't do resolutions that often.
Right.
So, any insight?
Regardless if this.
And I'll be honest, I don't know the details of the scope of work off my head in terms of if that's been added or not. But if the contract is awarded and that is not part of it, you know, it doesn't mean that we can always mod the contract to add any additional scope to that based on your comments and your concerns.
So what's the next step? I mean, you know, Luke, maybe you could give us the webpage and we can email it to one another, or?
Yeah, I know that's, actually Isaac isn't here, my supervisor. He's the one that had to go to these meetings to discuss this resolution. he's stuck at a management meeting all week. We were trying to figure out the best way to communicate it with the public, and in the meantime, we had put it on it's on the web, our database. Our response to I think it was a letter of support from, I think this one might have been from Rep. Considine.
Okay, maybe it was then.
But what I could do is I could talk to Isaac and see if he wants to give a quick recap of what exactly he went through at the next RAB meeting. I could also forward you a copy of the DNR's response to Representative Considine's letter of support.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe that's the best way for you to spread it out in the interim before the next RAB. Definitely open to other options of
Right.
getting that message out to the public, but that's, off the top of my head, those are kind of the two things that come to mind, is forward you a letter, and then maybe at the next RAB, Isaac kind of give a briefing of what happened.
When you're doing things behind the scenes, it's just that we didn't know. And so I'm really glad you didn't just sit on it.
Yep, yeah,
So thank you for that.
I think we partially thought maybe the representatives would reach back out since they had received
Sure.
a copy of the resolution, but hearing that didn't happen, we're happy
Yeah.
to give some input.
Because I'd like to at least know where we stand with that, and if there's anything more that we can do to try to meet that goal, because this group is very passionate about that. You know, we want to have all of those 6 isomers tested for in the soil. And if we're going to have people moving forward with this contract, you know.
You want to include it in,
Completely in,
Too, for safety in that, because when Settling Pond 2 had the fire, we had first responders out there that had no idea what they're being exposed to. And that makes this a project that shouldn't be delayed continually, because if we find out there's side effects from that, and these first responders, which are volunteer firefighters, they are not paid firefighters, are being exposed without being given any information. And as a property owner of Final Creek and Settling Pond 1, I've heard nothing from the Army or the DNR regarding this project, and it's somewhat disappointing, because I go back to my board and say, we don't know. You know, so communication, an improved communication process would be greatly appreciated.
noted, thank you.
So, moving on to the next topic, as mentioned earlier, the PFAS remedial investigation is still on track to be awarded in fiscal year '24. As part of that contract acquisitions, there's a lot of initial documents that the Army needs to submit to the contracting agency, which in this case we are using the MIC also for that award. And the Army has completed their scope of work and completed their independent government cost estimate to provide to the MIC, and from there the MIC will take over and do all that other milestones that I mentioned before. Market research and legal reviews and so forth. And then we were hoping, once that's completed, then we can engage with the DNR on developing the work plan for the remedial investigation. Any questions on that? And for the landfill number 5, repairments of the selling areas, as I mentioned before, we are currently working on a contract modification to the current contract with SpecPro to go out and do some repairs to that selling areas. We're hoping that that modification will be awarded by the end of this month, and once that is awarded, we can proceed with that work sometime this summer or early fall of '23. this last slide is, or this topic is pretty much just circling back on what was requested back, I believe, in October of last year at RAB meeting on requesting the Army to develop an article to share with the public the storyboard that was developed by USGS. And so we did develop that article and got some interviews with the USGS folks and members of the RAB, those that were interested in being interviewed. And we have submitted that article to the various news outlet that is shown here, including the Army website that's located below. So that is now available for y'all to take a look at and share as needed.
Did you really submit to the Sauk-Prairie Eagle? On Sauk-Prairie Star, I'm sorry. What about Sauk-Prairie Eagle? The Sauk-Prairie Eagle still exists?
Yeah, unfortunately,
Public Affairs Officer is not here to,
That paper's gone.
okay.
Doesn't exist.
Yeah, that was my fault, because I was going off my memory.
And the Sauk-Prairie Star isn't called the Sauk-Prairie Star anymore either, but I don't know what it is.
The Star News.
The Star.
Yeah, we
Star
quit getting
News.
it a long time ago.
Yeah,
some of them are like now converted to like just websites.
right,
Oh, okay.
exactly.
So when we mentioned sending to that, not the traditional newspaper, I guess, either newspaper or some form of, media.
My memory, which may not have been a great idea.
And thank you for sharing that, Michelle.
Oh, sure. Even though they were fictional newspapers, you're welcome.
Well, I just wonder if anybody's seen any articles in any of the papers.
No.
I read the papers regularly. I don't read every word in every paper, but I get the Baraboo News Republic, I get the Wisconsin State Journal, and every week I buy the Star. And I go through the paper, I've never seen anything about any of this stuff, ever. I'm not saying it's not there.
So you're right, so that's why I was careful by saying that we submitted
Right, exactly.
to them. It's a matter of them
Whether they want to
post it or have a chance to post it is another,
Okay.
question that we cannot, control. But, it is available on our website, so you can
Yeah.
guarantee that it's available there.
And I guess this takes us to just some postings of future RAP meetings, going back to that third Thursday of the month now, unless there's other conflict, which we don't anticipate. But now that you have three of us available to do this presentation, so those are the upcoming RAP meetings, if you want to take a note of that. And I just leave here with any questions, suggestions, or comments.
I just had a quick question. What is the Army's fiscal year? January 1st through December 31st or something else?
October 1st to September 31st. 30, I'm sorry, 30 days of September.
Could you go back a slide to put the dates?
Sure. This other one? Oh, this one, okay.
Thanks.
Have we been communicating the RAB meetings and the slides to you all in enough advance time? So I think we tried to do it a week before the meeting. Okay.
Like the day of or the day before.
Right.
So even about a week's notice was very helpful.
Right.
If you would add me mail list,
Sure.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
So if there's no further comments or questions,
I do have
go ahead.
one comment. I'm sure I'll be more vocal in the future. I'm absorbing, I have lots of thoughts. One of my research teams at UW-Madison has a grant from the Wisconsin Coordinating Groundwater Council to sample PFAS from a variety of sludges, wastewater treatment plants, landfills.
I'd be more than happy to work with Joel to do co-sampling or sample at the landfill as part of our PFAS study that is being funded by Wisconsin state agencies. You might imagine that we're having difficulties sampling landfills because the DNR does not require PFAS sampling, so any landfills that we get that would voluntarily assist in our study, we'd be happy to cooperate.
Thanks for sharing that.
Well, I guess that's at the end of the presentation. So thank you for all your time again, and hope you have a great night and drive back safe.